welcome to another video. I am once again angry at video games, so lo and behold, another video for your watching needs. I've talked about roguelikes before in here, though that video was about perceived and actual difficulties within Vampire Survivors and its offspring. Today, we're going to talk about the genre of which they are part, the infamous roguelites. I've been looking to fix my itch for roguelites. I love playing that genre of games. And in the last couple of months, I've tried many, and bounced off most of them. But in the process, I figured out what the issue was, and now I can confidently say that most modern roguelikes suck. But not for the reason people might think. Before we dig into this one, who am I, and who do I think I am spewing opinions online? I'm a big nerd who has played too many games in their lifetime. I have a list of games I've played that you can check out to see what I have experience with, and this channel is slowly filling up with more videos of mine, all about video game analysis. And I have played many a roguelite. Binding of Isaac, Risk of Rain, Bloodthrow, Megabonk, The Last Flame, Vampire Survivors, Monster Train, Astrea, Path of Acra, Nine Kings, Hollow Cure, Peglin, Cult of the Lamb, Bioweaver, Loop Hero, Chrono Arc, Rogue Legacy, Other Sides, I Need to Breathe, Hades. I think you get the point. Okay, so I have a big issue with some of the design of roguelites. And as we all know, when I get angry with video games, a video about it is born at some point in time. Before we do any analysis, we need to do semantics, because nothing as hotly debated as is it a roguelike or is it a roguelite? We're first going to look at the traditional roguelike. Of course, rogue is the first hit within the genre. It's where the name comes from after all. It was maybe not the first of its kind, but it was the first one that made it popular, and that tends to decide what lingo we are going to use from that point forward. Luckily for us, traditional roguelikes are pretty rigid in their description. Rogue Basin seems to have it nailed down. I've personally not played the old stuff, kind of missed the boat on that one, but I have played games that are featured on Rogue Basin as more traditional roguelikes, such as Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, Dungeons of Dreadmore, Caves of Qud, and Path of Acra. As always, we have to get definitions out of the way to observe a change that I witnessed and that bothers me every time I boot up a new roguelike. Let's first look at the traditional definition of the word roguelike. That's a bunch of them. Some sources have different ideas of what was crucial to the original roguelike. I like the one on Rogue Basin best. It had the most in common with the others, although I do have some small issues with their reasoning to why. The 5 core pillars of a traditional roguelike, according to them, are permanent consequences. Each choice is permanent, no reloading, death is the end of the run. Character-centric. The player embodies the character on the screen, they aren't disconnected through another abstract layer, aka hit the go left button, character move left. Small side note on this one, Rogue Basin claims this is for the extra connection to the player character and putting more emotional load on the loss of a character. But this doesn't necessarily tie in with player-centric. The older Fire Emblems, for example, are not character-centric in the way Rogue Basin explains it, yet do have that emotional connection to the characters through other game systems. Procedural content. Each run is different, giving more variety in gameplay. No 2 runs are the same. And again a note, Rogue Basin claims this is to offset frustration with doing the same thing over and over again. That feels pretty biased. It's likely whomever wrote these pillars could never be a speedrunner, yet speedrunning does have a lot of common ground with the roguelike mindset. Turn-based. Original roguelikes are turn-based and the world only moves when the player moves. I think this was also a bit of a technical limitation back in the day. It's why we see more action roguelikes these days. Finally, clean runs. No meta progression. Each run starts with the same chosen parameters. There are no advantages to be gained other than your own skill and knowledge. And that last one, it's the stinker we're going to be focusing on today. The other ones, important, don't get me wrong, but especially that last one is what caused the entire is it a roguelike or is it a roguelite debacle that happened over a decade ago at this point, that everybody on the internet got real fired up about and was also getting fed up with. Source, I was there. Because whenever the discussion of is it a roguelike or a roguelite seems to surface every now and again, it seems that that final point is the real point of contention. From here on out, for sanity's sake, I will be referring to the traditional form as a roguelike, and any game with the meta progression we're going to look at next as a roguelite. Seems online to be the most agreed upon definition too. We're just gonna roll with it. Please don't argue about it. It's just semantics. Okay? Cool. The genre of roguelikes was pretty chill for ages. It didn't do much since it became a thing. It gained a resurgence in popularity around 2008 to 2012. Spelunky and Binding of Isaac were the two that really kicked the popularity in gear. They were also at this time more referred to as dungeon crawlers, which most older roguelikes were referred to as well, but this includes games such as the Diablo franchise, which is really its own thing. Traditional roguelikes gave you your options at the start. You ventured inside whatever dungeons were generated for you, and you either reached an end goal or it was a live as long as you can type of a deal. This is why, for example, Path of Acra is still considered a traditional roguelike, despite having been released in 2024. Path of Acra only has unlocks for starting races and classes. It only drip feeds you a few more options at the start of your run. However, the content itself remains the same within runs. You can crank up the difficulty after each successful run, but this goes up to a hypothetical infinite and is only there for people wanting to push the limits of the system. Path of Acra touches nothing inside the game itself. No new bosses, no new items, nothing. You die, you start over from the beginning. Nothing changes between sessions, apart from the whole randomly generated dungeon aspect, which was also already present in older roguelikes. Spelunky in 2008 was one of the first games to shift this the tiniest amount. There's two types of unlocks in Spelunky. One is cosmetics for your adventure, completely irrelevant to look at. The second one is shortcuts. Spelunky offers you the option to slowly work towards shortcuts, allowing you to skip earlier zones at the start of your run. And that is unheard of in traditional roguelikes. The roguelite, as we tend to describe them now, was born. Granted, Spelunky shortcuts were more of an accessibility option. It allowed you to go to the higher zones and get familiar with them without having to stumble through the opening zones. Most real achievements you'd still have to beat the game without using shortcuts anyway. If the only transferable skill you have in traditional roguelikes between runs is knowledge and practice, Spelunky offered a way to its players to gain that knowledge in a much less time-consuming and hostile way. Spelunky kind of becomes a weird grey area when looked at it this way. Granted, Spelunky is a roguelite and not a roguelike for basically allowing a checkpoint. But I think there is an angle here where you could look at Spelunky as a roguelike with accessibility options. Or a roguelike that allows you to practice higher level content. Strict categorization is always difficult and not always productive, so I'm just going to leave it at the fact that Spelunky falls in this grey area a bit. Which, unsurprising, considering it is the first big game to garner popularity in the roguelike genre after ages. Binding of Isaac, however, really took the genre for a spin, and I am much more confident calling this one a roguelite. Binding of Isaac is this classic Zelda dungeon-inspired action twin-stick shooter, whole mouthful, that rode the new interest in roguelikes for Spelunky and absolutely made it a hype train that would not stop going, even till this day. Unlike Spelunky, it doesn't allow for checkpoints, but Binding of Isaac decided to go the unlock route. Your first runs are pretty short, but you can discover new items, new characters, and also new bosses during your runs. Binding of Isaac actively messes around with what a run looks like. Characters can dramatically shift how the game is played, new bosses create new challenges and move the goalposts, and your item pools shift over time with new items. Okay, look, I've played the absolute shit out of Rebirth, I 100%ed it, and I'm never gonna do that again. Edmund, stop adding achievements, please. I like that game, but every modern roguelite under the sun copies Bindings of Isaac systems, and they're not doing a particularly good job on it, for the most part. They copy the homework, but they aren't really reading what they're writing down. So then, what's the issue? The introduction of progressing the game on a meta level of that of normal gameplay is what caused a whole bunch of issues, and some games display them more egregiously than others. And even in some cases, almost contradictory to each other, at least at surface value. There's two big issues with all of this, all with their own examples. The item pool is the first one to look at. Most modern roguelite games will start the player with a handful or more of items that they can encounter during their runs, and as they play, more items in these pools get unlocked to be found during their runs. The Binding of Isaac was the first big one to do this, but their unlocks weren't limited to just items. And on paper this sounds fun. I do a good thing, I get more toys in my toy chest, I get to play with the new toys. I think it's a pretty abstract concept that is at the core of many a game. Get new thing, fun, me have a good time. Yep, cool, clear. I'm not saying Binding of Isaac will be perfect in this department either. However, I do think a lot of games copying these systems are missing some finesse here. The problem with inflated item pools is an increase of randomness. If you have 10 items in a pool, and only 2 of those are good fits for the build that fit your specific character, you have a 1 in 5 chance of finding a good item. But if more items unlock, the odds might start fluctuating. Some characters will benefit, other characters will get more trash in the item pool, increasing the amount of failed runs. Suddenly your item pool has like 5 good items, 45 bad ones, and your good item pools become 1 in 10. Just to give an example. Another example would be the Binding of Isaac has transformations. Get a few items of the same category, and Isaac transforms into a thematically appropriate character, getting strong new skills. Some transformations are much easier to do in the early game than they are late game. It's hard to determine that when this randomness changes, if it's bad or good. Sometimes it's really just a case of, do the players still think it's fun or good to play? But therein lies design choices that I do see happen. Because what if the player does get frustrated? What are the options? You can correct issues with your RNG. When looking at Vampire Survivors, that game allows you to banish items, both before and during the game. You can mark items to not show up in your runs, and within the game you can banish items so that they no longer show up in your level up rewards for that run. This is putting the balance on the player. Just a casual, you go figure this stuff out. And this can be fun. Vampire Survivors' most memorable moments for me was breaking the game so hard that death was no longer a possibility, and I could literally not see stuff on the screen anymore because my gold multiplier was just covering the entire screen. And while fun, it also marked the end for my enjoyment with that game, because I had touched the heavens and there was nowhere for me to explore up there. That's okay. Vampire Survivors' design philosophy was very much a dumb fun, brain off, dopamine go up type of game. Whether you like it or not, subjective, but I do think the game very successfully pulled off what they were going for. The thing with Vampire Survivors is that the banishment of items is a really big overcorrection of the RNG. You can go into any game now and always get the items you need. At this point I question, why do you just not let us choose our items from the start? Which, ironically, would bring it closer back to the original traditional roguelike format. Vampire Survivors almost becomes a power fantasy flavor traditional roguelike by endgame. And I think it's simply because its origins shine through. Vampire Survivors is an example of overcorrection. The type of game that I at this point go, I can just get what I want and win, why even bother playing? Though some games that frustrate me do the opposite. No RNG correction, roll with the punches, and that brings me to another frustration. No RNG correction is part of this, but a lot of these games take the meta progression of the game and make it a grind. I've talked about this in a previous video a lot. It's on screen now. I'll link it in the comments as well, don't worry. Where I specifically looked at Vampire Survivors and its offshoots. But this logic also applies to a lot of modern roguelikes as well. The grind is a core philosophy in the Swarm-likes, and is in a lot of roguelites as well. It's pretty simple. We figure out where the player's stats should be for any given stage. We start off the player weaker than that, and then they spoon feed the player stat upgrades with currency they get from runs, and eventually they'll reach the numbers to clear the stage. Then we give them a new stage and repeat the cycle. And because it feels like progression, and not as being deliberately started off weaker, the brain does good happy feelings. Grind is all about timing. How long feels just right? Too short and you rush through content too quickly, with the question on your mind being, was that it? I don't think there's any games in my direct pool of knowledge that fall in this category, but I do think that games like these in early access can suffer under these feelings. I think these games can suffer from being released too early, quote unquote. The more annoying one is definitely when the grind is too slow and/or takes too long. The most egregious example I can think of is Loop Hero. Loop Hero is an interesting game on paper, but it is actively trying to stop the player from progressing, because frankly there is very little content in that game. It limits you on the amount of resources you can get in a round, it limits you on the actions you can do within combat, even punishes the player if they get their hands on a slightly too broken combo, and then the costs of new upgrades are proportionally much bigger than what the player can bring in a run. And then, if you die in a round, you lose like 80% of earned resources, forcing you to play even safer and slower. Loop Hero actively tries to pull the wind out of your sails at all times, and I think it's simply the cause of hack job fixes to issues they ran into while testing, and then simply not having the skills to fix these issues elegantly. Loop Hero has content for a fun 4 to 6-ish hours experience, and tries to stretch that to a 40-hour experience or more. And Loop Hero is not the only one suffering from this, it just happens to be the one I played more of. I recently played a bit of Ball X Bit, which is a breakout meets roguelike type of game, which suffers under very similar issues. But instead of going through the ringer again like Loop Hero, I now saw the writing on the wall, said, nah, not again, and refunded that thing. So, then there's more issues that can arise. The most recent one I remember was Shape of Dreams, because with poor balancing, something else silly might happen. Shape of Dreams had this promise that most of these roguelites do: your characters upgrade the more you play them, you unlock more items during your run, etc, etc. Except that your first runs on those games might be your best chances of success. In Shape of Dreams, this problem is twofold. For one, character upgrades are not as critical in games that dramatically lower your stats, which means the necessity to level your characters is not as present. And secondly, is the other important one, it's the way the game is before you unlock a whole bunch of items. Binding of Isaac has an obscene amount of items, but it fixes its distribution by assigning each item a rarity. Rarity tends to go up on the powerfulness of the item, but also with how generically strong it is. Some items that almost always give the player an edge are of higher rarity than situational ones. But a lot of devs that just want to make one of those seem to overlook the finesse of balancing. Instead, I see them do an inverse of this a whole lot of the time. They look at the items that seem generically useful, damage ups, useful modifiers to skills and stats, and make them the staple item, and are often already unlocked at the start of the game. And then situational items tend to unlock later and be more rare to run into. The thing then becomes, at the start of the game, before you've unlocked anything, you are much more likely to run into useful skills and items for your runs, which means that if you want to quickly defeat the final boss, your earlier runs are much more likely to have this happen than later ones. And if you don't do it quickly, you are then more reliant on character level ups, and that is hoping they do rarities to begin with, because if they don't, you are truly at the mercy of RNG. Anyways, I defeated Shape of Dreams' final boss within the first 8 hours. I had barely leveled any characters, barely had any unlocks. I had to Google it, because I was convinced that surely that wasn't all there was to this game. There are so many unlocks still left. Nope, that's kinda it. There's 2 more secret bosses, if I want them. There's achievements, if I want them. But that feels weird, considering I had already passed the alleged biggest hurdle of this game. Binding of Isaac would then move the goalpost and go like, actually Mom's Heart is only an early to mid boss when looking at the late game unlocks. Get back in there, bozo. And I don't think this would necessarily fit Shape of Dreams either, but this works for Binding of Isaac in its favor, whereas Shape of Dreams ran into a brick wall for me. And again, Shape of Dreams is just an example that lives in my more recent memory. This is an issue with a lot of modern roguelites. All of them kind of copying each other's homework and not realizing what they're copying might not work great for them. And another issue these games suffer under is at the end of the grind. I do think this is more intentional when it comes to games like Vampire Survivors, but its roguelike siblings should really stop copying. If the upgrades give me numbers, and there's more upgrades than content, eventually the player will just hit numbers where they can finish the game blindfolded. Their stats are so much higher than what the difficulty of any level or stage is that skill becomes irrelevant. At that point, the challenge becomes patience. Are you willing to grind out hours of failed runs for enough upgrades to then cakewalk the actual content? I personally don't have this patience. I also think that this system is often used by developers less capable and or less willing to come up with the ideas to make these systems more elegant, more player skill based, deliberately shorter experience, but better to play. But we still live in a time of more time equals better game, but it's not. But those are my major gripes with modern roguelites, and why I seem to bounce off a lot of them. So let's straighten out some semantics and we'll wrap this up. The real linguistic problem is that this genre is undergoing a change. That when drawn out looks like a damn family tree. Okay, so at the top, you have the traditional roguelike coming first, with rogue as its origins and a whole bunch of offspring. Then species of roguelike start separating into two branches. The first branch is really similar. It's games that follow a lot of the same design decisions as the traditional roguelike, but are more modern releases. The modern roguelike, if you will. Games that would fall under this branch are games like Dungeons of Dreadbore and Path of Acra. They might take small creative liberties, but are otherwise still very similar to their parent. Their sibling, however, starts heavily experimenting with the fourth and fifth element of what Rogue Basin determined to be the traditional roguelike. Therefore, we have the roguelite. The rebellious second child that decides that it can be an action-based game, and maybe we can actually have some progression within the game. Spelunky and Binding of Isaac are the two big names within this specific category. The roguelite from there on gets a big offshoot that is pretty easily categorizable. The Swarmlikes, as I like to dub it these days, get a mass popularity boost with Vampire Survivors. As previously mentioned, I did another video on it and perceived difficulty in them. I'm not going in depth about them here. The thing I'm interested in, and frustrated about, is whatever its siblings in utero seem to be doing. I've used the term modern roguelite a few times now, but I don't think it's really solidified as a thing yet. Swarmlikes are born as a genre and are doing their own thing. They might not have matured properly yet, but they are a thing. With modern roguelites, I can basically spin a wheel because I don't know what I'm going to get. Is this game going to force me to grind currency over many failed runs and then I get to feel relief when I finally beat that annoying level? Is this game secretly going to be a test of my skills in the early game and then saturate my game with upgrades clogging the good fun? Is this game basically going to forgo all of its RNG in the name of just have fun? I'm even tempted to argue these games are still part of their original parent, the roguelite. They're all trying new things, but I think a lot of these games are still kind of stillborn when it comes to becoming an offshoot of the genre. Roguelites have changed two big things when compared to their parent. The type of game and game progression. I feel pretty safe to say that when compared to traditional roguelikes being only turn-based, the roguelites can be action-based or combinations of the two. Or something completely different and still be considered a roguelite and not a roguelike. The struggle seems to be on, okay, we're adding progression to a roguelike. What does that look like? The Swarmlike is very distinct. Often favors the eventually the numbers will catch up and the occasional just bash your head against the wall and eventually the dice will roll in your favor, with a very heavy focus on the grind between runs. As a side note, there is a type of game I considered as another branch for the roguelite, but after a bit of thinking, this is more of a phenomenon than a distinct genre. Roguelites are a popular genre, for sure, which means you get games such as Poker meets Roguelite, aka Blatro. I briefly mentioned Balek Spit, which is a breakout meets roguelite. It sprung into my mind as I played Demonic Mahjong, which is Mahjong meets roguelite. Fun game, by the way. When genres get popular, the obvious thing that tends to happen is to compare the fun new thing with other things we already know. Roguelites are doing this wedding between genres a lot at the moment, but this is not exclusive to roguelite as it happens with any hot genre. The roguelite still seems to be much under the banner of the Binding of Isaac and Spelunky design. They share design decisions with them and fail to truly offshoot into something I'm willing to call the modern roguelite. Something is definitely stirring. Games are trying all sorts of new gimmicks and attempts at refreshing the genre. But so far, I think the devs should take a hard look at the history of the genre and what kind of repercussions the change from no meta progression to meta progression has wrought. Anyways, I don't have the answers. I have but my observations. If you'll excuse me, I'm back to playing my games. I recently picked up Eugenics. Edmund is back at it again, gave me too many achievos. Is it a new modern roguelite and heralding a new branch in the genre? Probably not. So far it seems reminiscent of their Binding of Isaac design. I'm having a good time with it though, it's great fun. Thank you for watching. See you at a later time when the games anger me again. It'll happen again for sure. Maybe I'll have another manic breakdown over something like Expedition 33 again. We'll see. See you later.